Hello and welcome. Here are breaking stories from outside Africa. In a high-profile display of military pageantry, Chinese President Xi Jinping on Monday hosted a parade marking 80 years since Japan's defeat in World War II and used the event to press his vision for a remade global order. At the gathering, attended by leaders including Russia's Vladimir Putin, North Korea's Kim Jong-un, and Iran's Masoud Pezeshkian, was billed as a show of strength and solidarity, even as the countries present have no formal alliances. Xi hailed what he called China's unstoppable rejuvenation, and the parade's spectacle underscored Beijing's ambitions to reshape global power dynamics. Now, the event produced an immediate political reaction in Washington as U.S. President Donald Trump accused the assembled leaders of conspiring against the United States and urged Xi to acknowledge the sacrifices of American troops in the war. Away from that, violent demonstrations have swept Indonesia after a police-armored vehicle fatally struck a rideshare driver in Jakarta, sparking protests that have spread worldwide. At least 10 people have died and thousands have been arrested since the unrest began last week, with clashes reported at universities and government buildings. Fires were set at legislative offices and there were reports of looting at official homes. Under rising pressure, President Prabowo Subianto announced a rollback of controversial housing benefits for lawmakers, but moved to quell the unrest with a stern security response, branding some protest actions as terrorism and treason. Human rights groups have condemned the heavy-handed rhetoric and crackdowns, warning that such measures risk escalating tensions. And finally, Brazil's Supreme Court vowed not to yield to Washington's pressure in deciding the fate of far-right former President Jair Bolsonaro, a Trump ally facing coup charges. Judge Alexandre de Moraes, presiding over the 5-day trial, accused Bolsonaro of attempting to establish a real dictatorship. For News Central, senior international correspondent Afua Hagan has more.
Former President Jair Bolsonaro faces a potential 43-year prison sentence if found guilty of plotting to retain power after losing the 2022 elections to Luiz Lula da Silva. The trial has strained relations with President Trump, who imposed tariffs on Brazilian exports and sanctions, calling it a witch hunt. Judge Alexandre de Moraes maintained the court will resist internal or external threats. The verdict for Bolsonaro and 7 co-accused will be announced by September the 12th, following statements from judges, lawyers and prosecutors. A guilty verdict could derail Bolsonaro's hopes of a political comeback. Currently under house arrest, he was absent from court, with his lawyer citing weakness. The trial marks the first coup charges against a former Brazilian president, viewed by some as a democratic milestone and by others as political theatre. Prosecutors allege Bolsonaro led a criminal organisation plotting to reclaim power, including plans to declare emergency rule and assassinate Lula and others. On January the 8th, 2023, Bolsonaro supporters invaded government buildings, demanding military intervention against Lula. Bolsonaro, who was in the United States during the unrest, faces accusations of inciting the violence, which mirrored the January 6, 2021 U.S. Capitol attack by Trump supporters. A guilty verdict requires 3 of 5 judges' approval, with Supreme Court appeals possible. His allies seek an amnesty law to prevent imprisonment. Outside his Brasilia residence, supporters clash with protesters, holding Bolsonaro to jail banners and prison-clothed inflatable dolls. The trial continues. For News Central, I'm Afua Hagan.
Well, joining us to unpack this is our international correspondent, Afua Hagan. Thank you for joining us, Afua. Now,
great to be here.
It's a pleasure. Now, speak to us, on this particular trial. What exact evidence links Bolsonaro to the plot to overturn the 2022 elections first?
Well, first of all, it's really notable that this trial is really a trial of Brazil's judicial system. Can it hold a former leader to account after they have left left office, and do it in a way that is transparent for the people. You know, they're televising the trial on TV. They're having this verdict by September the 12th. This is about judicial independence on display. Now, when it comes to the details of what Bolsonaro is accused of, he's accused of a plot, a coup essentially, to make sure that he stayed in power after the election, and also that he was going to kill Lula, that is the current president, and some of his allies. These are quite serious charges that have been leveled against him. Like I said, a real stress test for Brazil's democracy, and about a rule of law president versus polarization. Bolsonaro, a very polarizing character on the right wing of politics, has very, very passionate supporters, as you can see from these pictures here. And what Brazil has to do in this trial is make sure that it's fair, make sure that it's transparent, and make sure that any judgment that it comes to can be carried out in a way that continues to be seen as fair and continues to be seen as transparent. Like I said, this is a real stress test for Brazil's democracy and for its judiciary as well.
Well, you did say it is a test of Brazil's judicial process, but then, Afua, how independent is, Brazil's Supreme Court from outside pressure?
And that's a really good question, because what we are seeing is President Trump exerting some of that outside pressure. Now, Moraes, who's the judge in this case, said that he will not bow to any internal or external pressure, whether that's from within the country or whether that's from foreign actors like the United States. And it is going to be difficult for that judiciary system to stay transparent. Like I said, some of the trial is being televised on television. It's being shown live on some sort of courtroom TV because they want it to be so transparent that people can see every day what's going on. It's very, very important that Brazil maintains that it's not going to bow from that pressure from the United States. The attack that took place on their capital, if you will, on 8th of January 2023, very much mirrored what happened in the United States by Trump supporters on the 6th of January 2021. Trump is very much aligned with Bolsonaro and his politics, and he has called for Bolsonaro's release, as well as putting sanctions on the judge and putting pressure, some real external pressure on the country. And so the role of the US and these tools of influence, that diplomatic pressure, the trade levers, tariffs and threats, will increase the pressure on Brazil's governments and their institutions. And that raises the stakes. And it becomes even more important for Moraes to make sure that these heavy-handed measures don't change the process, don't change his mind, and make sure that he can have a fair trial for Bolsonaro, and that any judgment that he comes to can be carried out in that way.
Okay, Afua, but then, speak to us on the protests, how are Bolsonaro's supporters and the military reacting on the streets?
Well, Bolsonaro's supporters, like I said, are very, very passionate. They have been outside his home in Brasilia, and they've been met with counter-protests as well. His supporters have been, campaigning for him. Let's remember that he is under house arrest at the moment. He hasn't been in court at the trial because his lawyer is saying that he isn't well enough to attend. And so his supporters have been loyally outside his home in Brasilia, shouting and campaigning for him, maintaining that he is innocent, and also maintaining that he should have won that election and he is the true president. And of course, there have been those counter campaigners. There have been Lula supporters and supporters of the rule of law and governance who have met Bolsonaro's supporters on the streets, who have countered their claims and who are supporting this trial and saying that he belongs in prison. You did see that inflatable outside of his house of Bolsonaro in, prison garb. They are supporting the idea that Bolsonaro should be jailed for the crimes that he allegedly committed during the time of the election.
All right, Afua, just before we let you go, tell us, are there other countries taking sides? And do you think that this could actually change Brazil's foreign alliances?
I don't think that it could change Brazil's foreign alliances. Like I said, America is the real foreign actor who is putting pressure on Brazil to perhaps not have this trial or to change its mind. Like I've said as well, this is a real stress test for its democracy, but also throughout Latin America, other countries that have seen this sort of political violence will be looking at Brazil to see how it comes out of this trial, how the rule of law prevails, how the country's democracy stands up against holding somebody to account, and someone who is a former president. So where it won't change its alliances, what it will do is see how it's viewed in the international community, especially in the US. The international community and other countries across South America will be watching very closely to see how they hold this former leader to account, and if there is any violence that erupts after this trial, how it deals with that also.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Afua, for speaking to us on this.